Welcome to another edition of Expanding Mind. I'm your host, Erik Davis, continuing our conversations about the cultures of consciousness. There's so many books about psychedelics right now that I'm frankly just kind of sick of them. I see another book come out about someone's shamanic healing journey or the renaissance in the clinical study of new psychedelic compounds. And while I'm very excited and fascinated by this transformation that psychedelics are going through in this decade, nonetheless, there's a kind of disheartening feel because I've found that many of these books are very repetitive. It's as if people have certain stylized points of view that they just sort of reproduce with slight mixings, language about healing, language about nature, language about the indigenous, language about PTSD, and there's so much remixology going on that it's a little disheartening, because one of the things that has always drawn me to psychedelics and made me sort of keep the faith throughout really my whole life since a teenager doing drugs in Southern California, was the kind of discourse it created, the kind of worlds, the kind of visions, the kind of strange languages and bizarre tales, unbelievable stories of other dimensions and hilarious encounters with the mundane world. And so I've been having this kind of disheartening sense that phase of a kind of exploratory literary writing about psychedelics is giving way to a new kind of a little bit more promotional, a little bit more bureaucratized, professional, and so it was with great pleasure that I recently finished Tao Lin's new book, Trip: Psychedelics, Alienation, and Change. But before I talk about that book, it would be helpful to give a little bit of a background on Tao Lin, because he's coming at these issues, at questions of psychedelics, consciousness, mystery, nature, and what role they can play today in our minds, our lives, and also particularly in terms of helping us change, helping us transform, helping us heal in the same kinds of questions that other people are asking. But he approaches it in such a different way that you got to take a step back. The first place I heard about Tao Lin was when he started writing a column about Terence McKenna on Vice magazine in 2014. And at first I was like kind of puzzled by the voice of this thing. It seemed very transparent, very enthusiastic, a little bit naive, but in a very exciting way that I quite enjoyed. Although I found it very odd, because I was used to people who have been completely immersed in the Terence McKenna worldview. I was more of a reality sandwich guy than a Vice magazine guy. And then as I started to do a little bit more research on Tao, I discovered that he sort of exists in a to some degree another bubble, another world, an alt literary world. Very New York City. Having lived in New York, I could recognize some of the signs of a very familiar kind of hothouse literary atmosphere of sniping and fame and literary intensity, a great devotion to work. And I'm just going to read you some of the titles of his earlier books, and that'll already give you a little flavor of the kind of writing he has, which is a very interesting kind of very transparent about what's going on inside of him, willing to go through these spaces of depression, of disconnection. Very much a kind of contemporary anime comes through a lot of his work. Titles like "You're a Little Bit Happier Than I Am," "Cognitive Behavioral Therapy," both of which are poetry books, and probably my favorite title, "Shoplifting from American Apparel." And so and Tao had got a good reputation going. Some people found him irritating. They said he was, I was just getting stuff from Wikipedia, accused of vacuous posturing. And then other people thought he was really important. Miranda July really liked him, and Gawker complained. And The Atlantic pointed out something that was very true, which he has a kind of amazing knack for self-promotion isn't quite the right word, but for mediating himself in ways, including aggressively internet-mediated ways, that really sort of play with what is fame, what is attention, what does it mean to be inside of this kind of hyper-mediated world that we're working in, and at the same time being deeply devoted to the craft of writing. Because whatever else you want to say about him, Tao Lin is an excellent writer. Not a style that I necessarily go for. He's got a very transparent kind of focus on mundane details, focus on the specific acts in the life. Not a lot of amazing lyrical flights that you might find in a more fantastic or sort of quote unquote visionary writer. But at the same time, for me anyway, his work is excellent at acutely describing states of consciousness, which is what you really want in a drug writer. You don't necessarily want someone who's thinking about ancient mythologies and, flying monsters and dragons and the Lord of the Rings. You want someone who can acutely describe shifts in mood, sensation, perception, and cognition. I just wanted to read one line from his the last book that he published, or at least the last novel he published, Taipei, which is all about his deep immersion in drug use, but from a very non-psychedelic perspective, where it's Adderall, it's Xanax, it's MDMA, there's some mushrooms in there, a little bit of LSD, but it's really this kind of pharmaceutical haze that he just plunges into, and it's really quite a striking drug novel. My friend Marcus Boone, who I had on the show a couple weeks ago, first recommended it to me, and he teaches drug literature, and gave the book to his class, who are younger and sort of more in a way like Tao Lin's quote unquote millennial generation sort of sensibility, but they didn't like it. My friend Marcus loved it, and I loved it as well. And I just want to read you one passage that gives a sense about his descriptive capacity. I think he's just taken I don't know what kind of, probably oxycodone. After blearily looking at the internet a little, then peeing and brushing his teeth and washing his face, he lay in darkness on his mattress, finally allowing the simple insistence of the opioid, like an unending chord progression with a consistently unexpected and pleasing manner of postponing resolution, to accumulate and expand, until his brain and heart and the rest of him were contained within the same song-like beating of another larger protective heart, inside of which, temporarily safe from the outside world, he would shrink into the lunar city of himself and feel and remember strange and forgotten things, mostly from his childhood. What I love about that phrase, it captures there's something deeply internet-y about Tao Lin, as if he's sort of playing with the way that our subjectivity gets spread across our media devices, the way we try to find ourselves and lose ourselves in mediation, and the way that drugs can become part of that quest and part of that drift. And then finally, there's that wonderful note of science fiction, the lunar city of himself, which kind of runs throughout the whole book. But Trip, the new one, is a whole different ball game. It's really like someone from another dimension than the usual psychedelic suspects coming in and talking about the transformative effects of DMT, of salvia divinorum, of LSD, of psilocybin, and really showing how exciting and transformative somebody like Terence McKenna could be. And so it's a wonderful book. It's a good primer, and it has so much fresh thinking. I mean, again, I'm bored of the neo hippie. I want more Tao Lins out there, and I really urge people who are interested in contemporary psychedelic writing to get Trip, because it's a different trip entirely. And I'm very happy that after that somewhat overlong introduction, I welcome Tao Lin to the show. Thanks for joining us, Tao.
Thank you for that introduction. I enjoyed it a lot.
That's good.
I was listening to an episode of your podcast all about me, and doing push-ups and stretching. It was really good.
Right on. Well, I'm glad you made it back to the microphone. one of the things you talk about in the book is going through this period. I guess it's sort of around and after Taipei that you were writing Taipei, where you go through a period of simultaneously recovery and quote unquote recovery. So could you talk? I'm really curious about that part in your life when you've been doing a lot of drugs. A lot of them are just sort of, I don't know, they're not really doing it for you anymore, and you're trying to move ahead, and at the same time you keep doing them, and then somehow something starts to shift, and the possibilities of psychedelics and the way in which psychedelics, as opposed to what you call drugs, can change and open up new dimensions. I'd love to hear a little bit about how that process happened and what role Terence McKenna or discovering Terence McKenna had to do with that.
I started, quote, recovering in 2010, I think, because that was when I started wanting to use less drugs. And by drugs, I mean Adderall, Xanax, various opiates, and MDMA and some other drugs. But I kept using more. And that continued through 2011 and 2012. And at the end of 2012, in September, I encountered Terence McKenna for the first time. And I had just finished the main final draft of my previous novel, Taipei. And in that novel, as you talked about, I describe a really bleak worldview where the protagonist is depressed and confused. So I felt like I'd written all I wanted about that kind of stuff. And at the same time, I'd been trying to get away from pharmaceutical drugs for 2 years. And then when I first heard McKenna, one of the ideas that first excited me the most was his idea of the end of history, and that instead of being pushed from behind, we were being pulled from something in the future, outside of time. And his argument supporting that, like in one talk, Eros and the Eschaton, he talks about increasing complexity since life began. And that how that logically will lead to a singularity at the end. And that excited me. And then around 2 months later, I went to stay with my parents in Taiwan for 2 months, I think. And that also helped me stay away from drugs. And then gradually over the next 2 years, I became really interested in psychedelics through Terence McKenna. And I also began smoking cannabis a lot and stopping Adderall and Xanax and other drugs.
So when you look at it now, like, what do you think you were looking for, or how did the earlier drug use with the pharmaceuticals, how did that like serve you, or what was it? What was it about in terms of dealing with your own mood disorders or depression, or trying to find your way through, a scary, weird time in history? What were you looking for then?
It served me really well because I've almost always felt depressed and or really socially anxious and shy, and those drugs made me feel outgoing And with them, I would be able to have more intimate relationships with people. And I'd be able to enjoy doing readings and other social things. So they helped me a lot in terms of that. But now cannabis helps me with all those things without the negative side effects.
And then why do you think you like start why did it take so long to discover cannabis? Was it something that you just didn't get into, or you tried it before and it didn't work? And because for me, I would always think that would come first. That would be the first thing you try because that's what's around. But that's my experience, my life history, and I'm just so curious about your route to these things is so different than mine. What took so long to discover the way that cannabis can be really helpful for aspects of social anxiety? And I mean, it can make it bad too, but it can also be very good for hanging out and talking with people.
Probably just never hearing someone like Terence McKenna or Kathleen Harrison talk about it. Because I feel like similar to what I'd heard about psychedelics, I just never heard any information about it that excited me.
So go ahead.
And I tried it a few times. And mostly it just confused me. I didn't have someone there telling me, like, explaining to me the effects and why they were good or how they could be viewed as good.
It's funny you bring that up because there's some argument in sociology about, why about taking drugs and about learning to appreciate the experiences, and particularly cannabis. There's a really robust, interesting literature about how with cannabis, you kind of have to learn how to appreciate it. And so there's something very important about the context in which you first try it. And again, like hearing people talk about it or hanging out with people who are like, hey, yeah, I just feel that thing or whatever, that all of those aren't incidental, that in some ways we're actually learning how to tune in to those dimensions of the experience that are fun and rewarding and renewing, but that it takes a little bit of work, and it often helps to have an explainer or somebody who can point it out to you.
Yeah, it's because it's just like a different state of consciousness. It's similar to like traveling to a new place. If you just pretended you're in the same place, you won't be able to do anything. But if you realize you're in a different place with different opportunities, you can use that.
So I'm curious, because the kinds of things that Terence talks about, whatever, the huge scales of evolution, monkeys discovering language through eating mushrooms, galactic mushroom travelers, interdimensional wormholes, machine tykes, jeweled basketballs. It's very rococo. It's very rich. It's very hippie and freaky, which are not tones that I associate with your work or your worldview, even up to the point of discovering Terence. So again, was it that he was such a good storyteller? Was it that the ideas themselves had some magnetic power for you? Was it like discovering like another genre of literature with all these crazy ideas, but because you liked him, you could kind of go with it? What was it about his mixture of Blarney and visionary ideas and philosophy and science fiction and actual science that sustained your interest for so many years?
I think it was his ideas and his sense of humor and his knowledge base, how wide it was. Because just one of the things he mentions, I can go off on a few books on, and I've done that. And he seems to always think one thing ahead or be one level outside viewing things. And that seems pretty rare. And that has kept my interest because I can also be thinking from one level outside while learning his ideas.
Well, I really like the way that you represent. I mean, that the book acts also as a primer on Terence and some of his main ideas, and a nice, brief history, and you continue to wrestle with those ideas and really the perspectives they allow. And I was thinking about Terence for this interview, and one of the things he said was that his main role was to give permission. And I used to think that was give permission to people to take, heroic doses of psilocybin and discover for themselves. And in some sense, that was true. But another thing that he did that he gave permission for, and this was certainly something that I took up partly through him, was to just release the speculative imagination. We're not talking about fiction. We're not talking about creating new mythology. We're talking about thinking. And how do we think about evolution and consciousness and technology and media and literature and think about it in a way where we're not stuck in academic structures, but we're thinking. We're not just playing or going, wow. And, he was so supple and rich and playful. And, so much of that has to, as you point out, really has to do more with cannabis than anything else. And I'll talk more about that in a second. But when I'm trying to go, like, what is it about Terence that is going to blow someone like Tao Lin's mind? Like, it's not necessary. You can't see it in your story. It's not like, oh, this guy's going to discover psychedelics and become fascinated with, eons of cosmic natural history and the pharmacology of indigenous spirituality. I was like, it wasn't necessarily in the cards. But what it feels like to me is that there's something about the space that he opened up and the encouragement to think big, to go to the big stuff and not be hemmed in by some idea of scholarly knowledge or what you need to do. So you feel like, to me, as someone who he gave permission to, and permission not only to think differently, but to kind of change. I mean, the trip is an amazing memoir of a subtle, tentative, not histrionic, not Hallmark card kind of stuff, but of transformation in a real way. So does that resonate with you, or is that like some weird guy like trying to read your life? Does that make sense?
Yeah, that does make sense.
Go ahead.
Something that I've gotten a lot from him and that he's encouraged me to do is to learn things myself. Because he talks about how he has that quote about how for one person to try to seek enlightenment from another is like a grain of sand trying to seek enlightenment from another. And he has a lot of other quotes like that. And as I've researched things myself, I've continually found things that have surprised me and encouraged me to keep learning things myself.
So he did inspire a lot of research too. Like, there's a lot of research behind this book. You went deep into a number of fields that were things you hadn't really discovered before.
I would say he inspired me to do more research than speculative thinking.
And go ahead.
Have you heard this quote? I'm going to paraphrase it. I think I've heard Terence McKenna, Paul Stamets, and some other people say it. They say this as a positive thing. They say, that 90% of what Terence said was bullshit, but the other 10% makes it worth it. Have you heard that quote?
I've heard people say more or less that. I would put the percentage slightly differently myself. I'd probably bring it a little bit down from 90, but
Yeah,
there was certainly a lot of it there.
Yeah, I've always disagreed with that quote a lot. I feel like 90% of what he said was just research that he'd done on history or other topics. And then 10% of what he does is probably speculative.
Yeah, that's definitely a different framework. I mean, I guess what it just depends on what you mean by speculative. But he was certainly willing to dive into research and then let it kind of grow, like to let it make its own conclusions and then figure out how we can go from there. And that's the kind of encouragement I mean. I don't mean just speculative like, well, maybe it's this, maybe it's that, da da da. It's more that when you're dealing with research, you let it grow and begin to associate and interconnect. And so that you can move from mythology to natural history to science fiction, as a image of some kind of notion of time, and then those things all start to resonate, which is it's just a rich way to be in the world. I mean, one of the threads of Trip, it seems to me, is that you, through Terence and through psychedelics, but also just through your own research, discovered more wonder in the world as an everyday experience. Is that true?
Yeah, it is true. And he did encourage me to learn things from different disciplines myself and then make connections. And that has been rewarding.
Yeah, could you talk a little bit about how wonder feels? I mean, again, because you pay such close attention in your writing to the sort of shifts of mood. And as someone who has spent a lot of time depressed and with my own kind of mercurial mood shifts and swings, I really appreciated it because it was truthful without being indulgent, but without pretending that there was any easy solution to these things. And so you have a very rich way of tracking your own experiential life, especially with moods and tones. How has wonder kind of become part of that? Is it something that's still occasional, or do you find that even your daily mundane life where you have to do the laundry and do a bunch of email or whatever, that there's still a kind of factor of wonder there that maybe wasn't there earlier times in your life?
No, I think most of the time when I'm emailing or cleaning or reading, I'm not feeling wonder. I'm feeling the same lack of wonder as I've always felt. But I think each day now I can feel some wonder. And sometimes I can sustain it for a while. And wonder is hard to describe. I didn't describe it in Trip, I don't think. But I've thought about it, and I think when I feel wonder, the idea of the end of history, that we're at this brief transformation, possibly near the end of time, that excites me and makes me feel happy and interested in things.
Well, I'm curious how you think about that the positive sense of history transforming. There's so many signs of everything up for grabs these days, and it's just getting faster and faster, and technology is clearly involved in a speed up, and we seem to be birthing some kind of weird global AI capitalist hyper-mediated thing that has less and less to do with the history of human beings. And Terence generally spoke of that in a positive way. It was like that there was some kind of great alchemical process that was happening. But at the same time, there's an interesting thread in your book that I definitely want to talk more about which is this idea that as modern humans, and yourself being an example of one of these, is that in some sense we're degenerate, that we are physically non-optimized due to the conditions of industrial living. And you go into some quite fascinating detail, things I didn't know about particular pesticides and how they work with the endocrine system and how they may be suppressing some of the neurotransmitters and other features of our nervous system that we need for healthy, good functioning, including capacities to experience some of these otherworldly states. So there's also a kind of a sense I get finishing your book that you feel that you yourself, partly the mood issues you've had to deal with, partly your own physical body. You talk about your teeth and having to have had 8 teeth removed and all these issues about the teeth fitting in your mouth. That there's also the sense that as we've gone forward into technology and into this strange speed up of history, that we're also kind of degenerating. I'm really curious how you relate the senses of excitement and also the sense that we're, physically just drifting down the slope.
I think when I feel wonder, I'm aware that that people are physically degenerate now. That's part of the end of history. That's what makes it so exciting, that people are having all these problems with their bodies now and struggling through it, but also experiencing new lives and states of consciousness and creating more complex and subtle art and helping each other. So that also seems exciting to me when I feel wonder.
Yeah. Do you feel like, go ahead.
Even though I had to have 8 teeth pulled because my jaw didn't grow as big as it would have if I had gotten all the nutrition that Aboriginals got for hundreds of thousands of years, I'm still happy now some of the time, most of the time. Make my life miserable.
What's that?
It doesn't make my life miserable.
Right. One of the other interesting things about the book in terms of Terence and his effect was something that's true in my life too, which is that, I started listening to Terence in the early 90s and I wrote about him and I got to meet him and we became, casual friends or sort of more colleagues, probably, grunts in the culture wars, as he put it to me once. That over time, I have gotten to know his ex-wife, Kat Harrison, much better. And I've even sort of noticed the way that where I was really obsessed with the kind of far out, big cosmic picture side of Terence's ideas, and they were super exciting, and I was just, galvanized by them. And he helped me put together all these other linkages of esoteric topics and the history of Gnosticism and UFOs and all this kind of crazy stuff. But as I get older, I find myself more and more kind of resonating with Kat, who's not as well known. I had her on the show, and I was happy to see that the interview I did with her was one of your sources for getting to know more about her, because she hasn't written the big book. But really, in some ways, what your book charts a sort of shift, and you even talk about it from the kind of masculine to the feminine, from Terence to Kat, and the book ends with a wonderful sort of more like a short story you write about yourself in the third person as you go to Occidental in Sonoma County, and you go to a drawing class that Kat taught at Botanical Dimensions, which I was just there for a couple of weeks ago for a class on tobacco. and you hang out with Finn, their son, and you go to the garden, and it's a wonderful. For me, it was incredibly wonderful to read because I know all these people, I know those places, and for me, they have a very deep current in California and being a hippie kid and all that kind of stuff. And then here's Tao Lin, who I'm just getting to know as this, kind of New York internet native guy with a totally different perspective. And you, as you make your way through this environment, and particularly in the garden, you talk about. There's so much. You say you don't think you talked about wonder and trip. I think you at least expressed it when you're talking about going through Cat's Garden, and just the relation with plants that started to happen with you that I don't think was probably part of your life before. So this is sort of a long way of setting up, hearing how you've come to feel about Katz Harrison's work and how it balances or complements or even shows different directions to Terence's.
Kat's work I feel like it balances all the ideas I've learned from Terence. I like how she talks about psychedelics by couching them within the world of plants. And she inspired me to start using cannabis in a different way. I've been smoking it soon after waking for like 2 years. And then I started smoking only after 5 hours or so after waking. And I've been doing that for around a year, I think. And I like that better.
Have you found that your own relationship to plants has changed a little bit? I mean, you talked about sort of recognizing the ginkgo tree in Washington Square Park and starting to be like, hey, look, the city's full of plants. Like maybe there's like a whole other dimension to inhabiting the city once you start recognizing plant species.
Yeah. I think I'd always supported plants and liked them, but I'd never actually paid attention to them until when I got into Terence McKenna, but then more when I encountered Kathleen Harrison. I took a plant drawing class with her that's in the book. And another part of my recovery is I've changed my diet a lot. And I've realized that Aboriginals used to eat hundreds of different plants. So I have a lot of different plant things around my room now. But I still live in New York City, and I want to move out.
Yeah, because I was going to ask you about that. You talk about sort of falling in love with that area and feeling like moving out there. And is it going to happen, or did you get back and go, well, New York's pretty nice. I'll get there eventually.
Yeah, that's sort of what happened. But then I visited Hawaii, and I like Hawaii even more than California, and I think I want to move there soon.
Yeah, it took me. I found that New York had a very powerful gravity well. That the tractor beam of New York was no joke, and I was glad I figured out a way to get out what I did after being there for like 6 years. What's that?
Or did he move when you got out?
To California. I'm from California, and I went to school on the East Coast, and then went to New York City, and cut my teeth as a journalist and writing for the Village Voice and all that, and that was really a place to be for a writing career in the 1990s, and so there was no reason to leave. But I also my soul needed to get back to the West Coast. So I was happier when I did, but I probably was a little less productive.
I also reference your Wired profile of Terence McKenna published in 2000, and you went to Hawaii, right?
Yeah. I'd never been there before. I mean, I'd only seen him in the States, or on the continent, and it was a trip. It was hard to go. You had to go there. There was this sort of sadness to it as well, but he kept his spirits up to the end. I mean, one of uh, my core beliefs about the transformative power of psychedelics is that whatever else they may or may not do, they definitely help prepare people for death and dying. That's not always the case, obviously, but in my personal experience, the people I know who were very wide awake trippers, you just inevitably develop a different relationship to death and dying, maybe because you have a sense that there's something beyond. But even if that remains a question, my experience is that people have a sort of curiosity and a acceptance and a willingness to kind of go through that process to a certain degree, despite all of its, difficulty and fear and sadness. And Terence was really, to my mind, he modeled that very well, and it seemed very genuine to me that he was, obviously wanted to live and was trying to keep living, but also went through that process very honorably.
Yeah, it seemed like he did. I like his quote, to meet him behind our eyelids.
That's good.
I mangled it, I think, but you got it.
Yeah, no, I think I remember that one. Let's see, what do we got here? We got a little bit of time left. One of the things I really was enjoyed was in your chapter on DMT, which is mostly devoted, and you took it a dozen times or something, at least up to that point, but you focused on one experience where it almost seemed like what you were really writing about was how difficult it was to write about it, or rather you were describing, rather than sort of using poetic language to try to characterize all of these ineffable nuances of the visions. You were kind of talking about what your body was doing in space. There's a person in your room. She had brought it to you. You're moving around. You're videotaping yourself, and so then you're kind of describing what happens on the visual record, and you kind of like it, and then you're writing about trying to take notes about the event, and then how those notes work. And it seemed like one of the things that was going on there, whether or not it was intentional, I don't know, but was a very interesting meditation on the relationship of language to these really far out aspects of psychedelic experience, like the full-on DMT flash, which is so hard to even grok while you're there, let alone try to language. And as a writer, and particularly as a writer with paying a great deal of attention to your own phenomenology, what was going on in that DMT chapter? What were you trying to sort of play with or stage in choosing that experience to be the one that you wrote about?
I think mostly I just wanted to share the one that was most memorable to me, and the one that I had gotten the most objective documentation of. And I was really interested in what my body was doing during it, because I didn't remember any of it. And when I hear other people's DMT accounts, I've never read someone's body being described by themselves from a video.
No, I thought that. Go ahead.
I've also never read verbatim dialogue throughout the DMT trip in real time, and I wanted to do that.
Yeah, I thought it worked it quite well, and it was particularly interesting because you had a whole paranoid jag, which I was happy to see you include. Not because I'm happy that you had the unpleasant experiences of feeling really paranoid that this woman who had brought you something, maybe she was a CIA agent and was tracking you or whatever. But that's very much part of if you're looking at the wide range of responses to psychedelics, you're going to spend some time in paranoia. And I sometimes feel that people, they don't want to acknowledge it, or they don't know how to acknowledge it. And your method, which is to just kind of be as transparent as possible and just kind of like, just the facts, ma'am, like lay it out. You enabled a sort of depiction of psychedelic paranoia that was very believable, but also like you get through it, and it goes away. It's just a phase. It's not something like to totally freak out about. But I'm curious. Do you feel like that you really grasp the kind of DMT experience, or was there a sense that there was still something kind of holding you back, or that it wasn't quite right for you? Or that part I couldn't quite tell from the decisions you made about writing about that particular experience.
I think I still have a lot of preparation to do, but I'm still excited about smoking DMT. And I think one thing that has held me back is Terence McKenna's, that he stresses how weird it is and that you can die by astonishment. Because I realized this when I read Timothy Leary's 1968 book, High Priest, because book form asked me to review it. And he has a chapter on DMT in there. And he focuses on how you go to a predictable place that you can just enjoy. And he describes 90% plus people getting 50 milligrams intramuscularly injected, having successful ecstatic experiences. And he also describes doing it himself the same way. And he has a really positive experience. So now I think of smoking DMT as something I can look forward to more, not fear as much.
When you talk about preparing, in the sense that now you're, that being a psychedelic user is a learning process. It's, something like self-growth, but you're also learning about how to navigate in these realms and your own reactions and things like that. How do you feel like that's unfolding for you? Like how it's either changing, you're back in New York, you've written the book, now you're going to do all this book tour stuff. You're going to start to think about your next project. You know a lot of the same people you've known for a while, or you're still living as a hermit in your Brooklyn apartment or whatever. How is this process continuing to unfold for you, after the pages of Trip are over?
It's continued to unfold, and I feel as or more excited and encouraged by it, I think. Partly because I'm also writing my fourth novel, and it's called Leave Society, and it's autobiographical, and it's set from 2014 to 2018. And I'm writing also about recovery. But instead of focusing on psychedelics, I'm focusing on recovering from other aspects of society, like malnutrition and toxins and electromagnetic radiation and other things.
Yeah, because you get into some of that there in Trip, and partly as explaining sort of your view of the degenerate body. And I felt it was really interesting that while a lot of people who might have taken the similar kinds of drugs or similar kinds of psychedelics as you, or people who are inspired by Terence McKenna, might focus their energy on something like, mystery or transcendence or the entities or the alchemical object at the end of time, or UFOs, that kind of stuff. But really what came to for me through the book is that it opened your eyes to nature, but in the broadest sense, material compounds, the history of amino acids, the history of plants and speciation, and how plant materials interact with our own nervous system, and the fact that our nervous systems today are also embedded in this sort of non-natural but part of nature matrix of technology, of electromagnetic fields, of the pesticides and the toxins that are in the plastics, and all the crazy products that have exploded over the planet in the last 150 years. But what connects those to me is that your sense of nature, of the body, of materiality, of material molecules, of how they interact. It's a very, if you will, secular vision in that you're really interested in the level of that, and that healing has to come not just through psychology, and you don't talk very much about psychology, like, oh, a therapy was this, and I had this problem with my mom, and then there was, da 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 da. You're really more focused on material conditions, what the toxins in our air, the electromagnetic fields that our bodies move in, how we're exercising, how we're dieting. Have you always had that kind of physical orientation, or is that something that psychedelics also partly opened up for you, this sort of vividness of the natural world and our relation to it?
I've been interested in things like pesticides' effect on my body since college, I think. But I had never gotten that deep into it. Terence McKenna encouraged me to learn information from books, because he often talks about how many books he has read, or other people talk about that in his libraries. And before him, I read probably 90% fiction. And part of me just assumed accurate nonfiction information couldn't be found on certain topics like health. But with Terence McKenna's encouragement to read more books, I started reading a lot of nonfiction books. And I've read like 200 since 2013. And I've learned that accurate, surprising, startling information can be found in nonfiction books, ranging from obscure to best-selling. But in the media, which is mostly where I got nonfiction information from before, on a lot of topics, if that's your only source, I feel like it'll just remain confused and a lot of times despairing.
And so in some sense, you kind of woke up to books, or at least nonfiction books. That's a great thing for Terence to have infected you with.
Yeah, he did. I'm really happy about this, being infected with that. And I also had some other people promoting this, because I listened to a lot of punk music in high school, and a lot of bands promoted books and were distrustful of the media and government and corporations. And Terence McKenna also had this message.
So you must be. I'm curious if you feel like, as you discover more, that you have a draw to escape the city.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, I do. learning about how air pollution affects me. And the benefits of nature. Like I learned that trees give off compounds called phytoncides. And after you breathe these in for a week, there's increased activity in your body of cells that kill cancer cells. So people used to just always be breathing in phytoncides and having this level of activity of cancer killing cells. But living in city, we don't have that unless we breathe peppermint oil or do other things like that.
So it sounds like you've been exploring that domain a great deal, and that's a lot of what your next book is about. Is diet, antitoxins, compounds, practices that really help heal the body and heal the nervous system and the emotions associated with it.
Yeah, and also things like MK Ultra and other things that people experience in society like that. Secret government projects. And there's stuff about 9/11.
Oh, you've got some rabbit holes going.
Yeah.
Well, I think as the doors of the rabbit holes open ponderously, I look at the clock and see that we are at the end. So we'll have to leave that for talking about your next book. But I very much look forward to it. I think your journey is very very interesting and very important, because I think it models things for a lot of people who are coming to psychedelics from very different perspectives, and can discover wonder and transformation and the impetus for learning and independence, whether or not you're interested in, whatever, Grateful Dead or Psytrance or the niceties of nouveau shamanism. And so I respect you for putting yourself on the page that way, and I look forward to seeing you do it more.
Thank you. I enjoyed that a lot.
Great. Excellent. All right, folks. Once again, Tao Lin, Trip, Psychedelics, Alienation, and Change. We didn't even talk about alienation, but that's how it goes on Expanding Mind. We never talk enough. So I heartily recommend his book. And until next week, keep your minds open.